Chapter 4. The Murder of the Archduke. At the Admiralty, 1914. The year 1914 opened cool and calm. The Anglo-German cooperation in Near Eastern affairs and the progress of the colonial treaty had soothed the anxiety and suspicions of the British cabinet. Indeed, I had encountered in the previous autumn the most stubborn resistance to the Navy estimates necessary to fulfil our declared programmes against Germany. Mr. Lloyd George's interview. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, in the opposite mood from his Agadir speech, headed the formidable opposition of a majority of the cabinet. I made it clear that unless the programmes were maintained, I should resign. Christmas brought an interlude to this sternly fought internal controversy. On January the 3rd, Mr. Lloyd George published an interview in the Daily Chronicle, in which he denounced the folly of expenditure upon armaments, referred pointedly to the resignation of Lord Randolph Churchill in 1886 on the subject of economy, and declared that the state and prospects of the world were never more peaceful. I had spent my holiday near Biarritz, and returning through Paris, met President Poincaré and some of the leading ministers. I was impressed by a certain air of uneasiness in these circles. Mr. Lloyd George's interview seemed to have disturbed them. An outward calm. As the year advanced, the belief of our cabinet that dangers were passing away grew steadily. I carried the full naval estimates through the cabinet only by the fact that the adverse majority did not wish to face my resignation as First Lord of the Admiralty, and the violent agitation that would have followed when they were about to be embroiled in the fiercest part of the Irish quarrel. Even the vigilant watchdogs of the Foreign Office were at ease. Both Houses of Parliament comported themselves as if foreign affairs did not exist. The sanguine mood of the British government found its counterpart in the French chamber. The parties of the left held sway. Keen efforts were made to modify the law of 3 years military service, which had been passed in 1913. Indeed, it was only maintained by a compromise which released the third-year soldiers while calling up 2 new contingents of recruits in their place. This year, for the first time since 1870, the French president dined at the German embassy. This year, for the first time for 19 years, we accepted a German invitation for the visit of a British squadron to Kiel during the regatta week in June. We proposed to send at the same time 4 battle cruisers to Kronstadt to pay a like courtesy to the Russians. But under the surface, the relationships of the great powers were ceaselessly hardening. The enlargements and improvements of the Russian army and the building of military railways proceeded apace. France had in one form or another consented to the enormous sacrifices of the 3 years' law. Germany was not only increasing her army and navy, but by a capital tax of 50 million sterling was purchasing war materials and manufacturing munitions and equipment with intense activity. The importations into Germany of all the rare metals needed for the hardening of steel and the making of the weapons and appliances of war, if we had only known it, tungsten, aluminium, vanadium, nickel, antimony, manganese, exceeded in 1914 alone the aggregate totals of the 3 previous years. Wordy battles were fought between German and Russian newspapers and professors, in which all sorts of disagreeable and ugly recriminations were exchanged. The Russian War Minister inspired statements about the growing efficiency of the Russian armies. In the summer, Sir Edward Grey asked me to arrange conversations between the First Sea Lord, Prince Louis of Battenberg, and the Russian naval authorities, similar to those which had taken place at intervals since 1906 between the French and British general staffs. The topics discussed were minor, but the event was significant, and meant to be significant. A good deal of vague war talk was rife in German military circles. Still, the forces of peace seemed to be more than holding their own, and both in Great Britain and France, party politics and bitter faction held the stage. The meeting at Konopish. The last few weeks of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand's life were filled with interest and action. In the middle of June, he received the Kaiser as his guest at Konopish. For 3 days, the pair remained in close confabulation. According to the account which William II furnished to the German Foreign Office, the conversations turned mainly upon the Archduke's dislike of the Hungarians, for their medieval habits and oppression of other races within their bounds. He urged the importance of continually pressing Count Teaser not to maltreat the Hungarian Romanians, and thus foment dissension between the Triple Alliance and Romania. The only other questions said to have been discussed were the relations between Greece and Turkey, Italy's conduct in Albania, and the replacement of the Hungarian Count Sigourney by an Austrian ambassador in Berlin. Rumour had extended the list. It has been asserted that the whole European position was surveyed in a sinister manner, and that the Kaiser said to the Archduke, "If we do not strike soon, the situation will get worse." It seems certain from what followed that he made no definite promise of German aid to Austria in any particular case. The visit ended, the Kaiser proceeded to his villa at Corfu, and Franz Ferdinand to the army manoeuvres which are to be held in Bosnia. The schedule of his movements had been widely announced. Not only would the Austrian troops be exercising in great strength in the province coveted by Serbia, but thereafter the heir to the throne would pay an official visit, accompanied by his wife, to Sarajevo, the Bosnian capital. He would enter it on June the 28th. This was the anniversary of the fatal Serbian defeat in 1349 at Kosovo Pole, the field of blackbirds. All this was read and brooded upon in Serbia. This visit was also to be for the Countess Hotek, or Duchess of Hohenberg, as she now had become, the most formal assertion of her growing aspirations to ceremonial recognition. She was to join her husband at Sarajevo, and the arrangements for her separate journey were set out in that full official detail reserved for the journeys of the Emperor himself. Well might Count Parr, as he perused the programme, exclaim scandalised, "What are we coming to?" Well might the Emperor accelerate his departure from Vienna to Ilsch, to avoid either accepting or repulsing such pretensions. The Black Hand. The Serbian officers who had cut to pieces King Alexandra and Queen Draga at Belgrade in 1903 had banded themselves together for mutual protection in a secret society called the Black Hand. This deadly association nourished a fierce patriotism with the discipline of the early Jesuits and the methods of the Russian Nihilists. They were connected at many points with Serbian governing circles. It was even said that the Crown Prince Alexander, Pasic the Prime Minister, and Putnik the Commander-in-Chief had at one time or another been with them, and their leader, Colonel Dmitriev, was actually at this time the head of the Serbian intelligence branch. Amid many obscurities, there is little doubt that Dimitrievich organised the plot to murder the Archduke during his visit to Bosnia. A number of fanatical youths, most of them not yet 20, were incited to go to Sarajevo. They were provided under his authority with bombs and Browning pistols, which they were taught to use. They were given money for their journey and maintenance. They were given cyanide of potassium for suicide in the last resort. There seems no doubt from post-war revelations that Pasic and several of his colleagues learned what was afoot. The Serbian government at that time was at variance with the Black Hand, upon the administration of the newly acquired Macedonian territory. It is said on their behalf that they sent orders to their frontier authorities to prevent the conspirators passing into Bosnia, but that these frontier authorities, being themselves members of the Black Hand, sped them on their way. It is also suggested that the government endeavoured to warn Vienna that the Archduke would be in danger during his visit to Bosnia and Sarajevo. Indeed, the Serbian minister to Vienna, Jovanovic, almost certainly made a vaguely worded statement to one of Berchtold's subordinates to this effect. So far as this was regarded at all, it was regarded as an impertinence. The Archduke was alive to the dangers of his visit, and he attempted without success to dissuade his wife from coming with him. As a prince and a soldier, he himself felt bound to fulfill his engagements. A courtier soldier. In these circumstances, it might have been expected that the most stringent police and military precautions would have been taken. Instead, the neglect and carelessness was such as to foster the insulting suspicion that the Archduke's life was not much valued in the higher spheres of the Austro-Hungarian government. At this point, General Potiorek presents himself for closer examination. After Conrad, he was the leading military personage in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Conrad himself was invited to become Chief of Staff in 1908, and proposed Potiorek instead, a dapper, keen-looking soldier of almost monastic self-discipline, with a strong element of mysticism in his nature, and an intimate and carefully developed connection with the Emperor's aged court. Potiorek stood on firm ground. He was at this moment, as the military governor of Bosnia, responsible above all others for the safety of the heir apparent during his visit to the capital. Whether maliciously or through sheer incompetence, he grossly neglected his duty. His subsequent military record favours the more charitable view. But of course, he knew how strongly the court disapproved of royal honours being accorded to the Duchess Sophie. It was understood she was not to be unduly exalted. Few police were imported, no troops lined the streets, no reserve of gendarmerie was at hand. The arrangements invited disaster, and much as they were muddled in execution. The tragedy of Sarajevo. On the afternoon of June the 28th, the Archduke and his wife entered Sarajevo. The murder had been carefully planned. At least 7 assassins had taken their stations at various points upon the probable royal route. Every one of the 3 bridges had its 2 or 3 murderers in waiting. The first attempt was made on the way to the town hall, but the bomb slid off the back of the motor car, and its explosion only wounded 2 officers of the suite. After the miscreant had been caught, the Archduke proceeded to the town hall, and received in a mood of natural indignation the addresses of welcome. The police precautions had seemed to be lax, and the owner of the motor car, Count Harak, who sat beside the driver, accosted the Governor Potiorek. "Has not your Excellency arranged for a military guard to protect his Imperial Highness?" To which the Governor replied impatiently, "Do you think Sarajevo is full of assassins, Count Harak?" The Archduke proposed to alter the return route, and to visit the hospital to which the wounded officers had been taken. When told that the bomb thrower had been captured, he is said to have remarked, "Hang him as quickly as possible, or Vienna will give him a decoration." A strangely bitter saying, almost his last. Count Harak wished to stand on the left footboard to protect the Archduke. "Don't make a fool of yourself," said Franz Ferdinand. The 4 cars moved out into the dense crowds in the original order, but at a faster pace. At the entrance to Franz Joseph Street, the crowd, uncontrolled by the police, made a lane, and by a fatal error, the cars turned back to the original route. Governor Potiorek, who sat facing the royal visitors, told the chauffeur that he had taken the wrong turning. The car slowed down and came close to a right-hand pavement. A young man fired 2 shots at 3 yards range. The Archduke continued to sit upright. His wife sank upon his breath. A few moment words passed between them. For a few moments no one realised they had been shot, but the Archduke had been pierced through the artery of his neck, and the Duchess through the abdomen. Both sank into unconsciousness and expired within a quarter of an hour. The assassin, a Serbian student named Princep, was seized by the crowd. He died in prison, and a monument erected in recent years by his fellow countrymen records his infamy and their own. Such was the tragedy of Sarajevo. In those days I was much concerned with the preparation of the Navy and with the creation of the Naval Air Force. I had spent the early hours of the morning at the Central Flying School at Upavon, and motoring back to Portsmouth, bought the newspaper at the ferry across the harbour. I remember I read the news while the cars waited. I recall a sudden and vivid feeling that something sinister and measureless had occurred. I spent the afternoon in the dockyard where so many ships were building, and did not reach the Admiralty till late at night. Our Admiral telegraphed from Kiel that following the news of the murder, the Kaiser had immediately quitted the scene, and that the regatta and festivities were at an end. I reflected that it would be nice to get our great vessels back from the Baltic soon. They passed the belts by June the 30th. Austrian fury. The crime of Sarajevo roused widespread fury throughout the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and its various races were united with their government in rage and hatred of Serbia. To judge their feelings, we must imagine our own in a similar case. Suppose that Ireland had been a republic growing in power and hostility, that it was not an island, but lay with frontiers actually joining Wales and Scotland, that there was a vehement, active pan-Celtic scheme to unite Ireland, Scotland and Wales into a separate foreign combination against England, that the Prince of Wales had gone to Carnarvon on official duty, and that he had been murdered by a band of assassins, organised and sent by an Irish secret society and armed with weapons supplied from the Dublin arsenal. That would have been a not unfair parallel to the situation now created in the Habsburg dominions. For some days, the anger of the peoples of Austria expressed itself in violent demonstrations against Serbia and attacks upon Serbian representatives and establishments. The British Consul General of Budapest reported that Hungarian feelings was even more incensed. A wave of blind hatred for Serbia and everything Serbian is sweeping over the country. The Hungarian nation, he thought, willing to go to any lengths to revenge itself on the despised and hated enemy. The emperor, though shocked at assassination in principle and loathing Serbia, was decidedly resigned and even cool upon the personal aspects of the tragedy. His first remark to Count Parr on hearing the news reveals his distinctive point of view. "Horrible! The Almighty does not allow himself to be challenged with impunity. A higher power has restored the old order, which I unfortunately was unable to uphold." This then was the punishment administered by Providence as guardian of the Habsburg dynasty to an heir apparent who had fallen into a morganatic marriage. Conrad's opportunity. The opportunity for which Conrad had waited so long and pleaded so often had now come. He demanded, as usual, immediate war upon Serbia. Mobilise at once and march in. Those who had restrained him in the past were gone. A Renfrew was dead, the Archduke was dead, and Conrad found in Count Berthold not opposition but agreement. Berthold had already made up his mind. As foreign minister he was not, however, free to act alone under the emperor. The constitution required that he should procure the agreement of 2 minister-presidents of Austria and of Hungary. The Hungarian Count Tisza was an outstanding figure, a man of force and personality, clear-sighted, resolute, severe in speech, and with political influence far beyond the authority of his high office. On July the 1st, Berthold told Count Tisza that he meant to make the horrible deed at Sarajevo the occasion for a reckoning with Serbia. Tisza objected. He warned his colleague of the measureless consequences which might follow what he stigmatized as a fatal mistake. He wrote to the emperor the same day that Serbia's guilt was not proved, and that if the Serbian government were able to furnish satisfactory explanations, the empire would have exposed herself before the whole world as a disturber of the peace, besides having to give a great war in the most unfavourable circumstances. He insisted upon an inquiry. He dwelt upon the unsatisfactory attitude of Romania. He advocated a treaty of alliance with Bulgaria as a vital precaution before a breach with Serbia. On the other side, Conrad and the generals clamoured incessantly for war. Conrad has given his own account. On July the 1st, I again spoke to Count Berthold, who said that His Majesty also wished to await the result of the inquiry. Count Sturck and Count Tisza, said the minister, pleaded for maintaining cool nerves. Tisza was against war with Serbia. He was anxious, fearing that Russia might strike at us and Germany leave us in the lurch. Sturck, on the other hand, expressed the opinion that an inquiry would provide ground for going forward. I put forward the view that nothing but a powerful attack could prevent the danger threatened from Serbia. The murder committed upon the patronage of Serbia was the reason for war. To Berthold's anxiety, lest Germany and Romania should leave us in the lurch, I replied that if that was how things stood with our alliance with Germany, we should in any case have our hands tied. The minister said to me that he had prepared a memorandum in which he called upon Germany to secure Romania for the Triple Alliance. I protested that we must ask Germany before all else whether she would or would not protect our rear against Russia. Tuczersky's reprimand. On June the 30th, Tuczersky, the German ambassador in Vienna, had reported to Berlin that he was taking every opportunity to advise quietly but very emphatically and seriously against 2 hasty steps. The Kaiser's marginal comment upon this is celebrated. Who authorised him to act thus? That is very stupid. It is absolutely none of his business, for it is solely Austria's affair what she intends to do in this matter. Afterwards, if things go wrong, it will be said that Germany was not willing. Tuczersky will please stop this nonsense. The Serbians must be disposed of, and that right soon. On July the 1st, Count Hoyos, the permanent official at the head of the Ballplatz, received a German publicist, a Dr. Victor Naumann, who was in close touch with both Herr von Jago, the German Foreign Secretary, and Stumm of the German Foreign Office. Naumann declared that not only in army and naval circles, but also in the Wilhelmstrasse, the idea of a preventative war against Russia was not so entirely rejected as it had been a year ago. An agreement had been reached with England about Africa and the Portuguese colonies, and the visit of the British fleet to Kiel had been arranged as a demonstration of the improved relations. Consequently, they felt sure that England would not intervene in a European war. Sturm, he said, had spoken very earnestly to him of the danger of the Russian armaments. On account of many difficulties, France would probably be compelled to work upon Russia in a pacific sense. But if nevertheless it came to a European war, the Triple Alliance was still strong enough now. The Emperor William, if he was spoken to in the proper way at the present moment, when he is enraged upon the murder at Sarajevo, will give us every assurance and will hold to it even to the point of war, because he recognises the dangers to the monarchical principle. The German Foreign Office will not oppose this attitude, because they consider the moment favourable to bring about the great decision. Austro-Hungary was lost as a monarchy and a great power if she did not make use of the present moment. German instigation. This very strong hint enabled Berthold, when he told Czerski the next day, to complain that Austria had been insufficiently supported in the past by Germany and did not know how she stood now. Czerski replied that this was due to the Austrian habit of expounding ideas without a definite plan of action. Berlin could make the Austrian cause its own only if Austria came forward with such a plan. To the Emperor on the same day, Czerski was now fully abreast of the policy of the Wilhelmstrasse, declared that His Majesty could count on having Germany solidly behind the monarchy whenever the question arose of defending one in its vital interests. The decision on the question of whether such a vital interest was at stake must be left to Austria herself. My Emperor would stand behind every firm decision of Austria-Hungary. It may well be believed that Francis Joseph drank this in with satisfaction. A more open incitement to an ally, whose people were already beside themselves with anger, cannot be imagined. On the one hand, therefore, at this stage we find both monarchs and both foreign offices ranged with Conrad on the side of violent action against Serbia, and only Count Tisza opposed. The Austrian inquiry. Berthold always had in mind the chastisement of Serbia as something sharp, swift and local. He pictured to himself an ultimatum and the immediate seizure of some Serbian town or district by Austrian troops at their peace strength, without the delay or gravity of mobilisation. He had pressed this upon Conrad in 1913, and the Chief of the Staff had explained repeatedly the technical impossibility of such an operation. Nothing could be done without mobilisation. "What are you thinking of?" he had exclaimed in October 1913. "If we mobilise, Potiorek will have 80,000 infantry, but now he has only 25,000, and they are all scattered over Bosnia." But Berthold persisted in this idea. He dreaded the 16 days delay which must elapse between the order of mobilisation and the crossing of the Serbian frontiers. He feared what might happen in Europe in those 16 days. It was one thing to march into Serbia and to occupy a sufficient bit of territory, thus confronting Europe with the accomplished fact, and quite another to set on foot the formidable process of mobilisation. At this moment, undeterred by Conrad's objections, Berthold still contemplated military action to be undertaken immediately, that is, without mobilisation. But to this again, Count Tisza would not agree. The Emperor's letter to the Kaiser. It was necessary, above all things, to make certain of German support, and on July the 4th, Berthold sent Count Hoyers, his trusted official confidant, to Berlin for a personal consultation with the German chiefs. Hoyers was armed with two documents. First, a memorandum advocating the inclusion of Bulgaria in the Triple Alliance, as urged by Tisza, and secondly, an autographed letter from Francis Joseph to William II. Neither of these documents mentioned the sudden inroad upon Serbia, which was in Berthold's mind, for this would have been contrary to Tisza's stipulation, but in addition Count Hoyers had had verbal explanations to give. These explanations revealed Berthold's definite, firm plan, for which Berlin seemed to wish. The Emperor's letter requires a lengthy quotation. According to all the evidence so far brought to light, the affair at Sarajevo was not the bloody deed of an individual, but the result of a well-organised conspiracy, the threads of which reached to Belgrade, and even if, as is to be presumed, it will be impossible to prove the complicity of the Serbian government, there can indeed be no doubt that its policy which is directed towards the union of all southern Slavs under the Serbian flag, incites to such crimes, and that the continuance of this state of affairs constitutes a permanent danger for my house and my territories. The efforts of my government must in future be directed towards the isolation and diminution of Serbia. The first step in this direction should be to strengthen the position of the present Bulgarian government, in order that Bulgaria, whose real interests are identical with our own, may be preserved from a relapse into a Russophile policy. If it is recognised in Bucharest that the Triple Alliance is determined not to forgo the adhesion of Bulgaria to it, yet would be prepared to induce Bulgaria to bind herself to Romania and guarantee the latter's territorial integrity, perhaps people there will withdraw from the dangerous course into which they have been driven by a friendship with Serbia and the rapprochement with Russia. If this succeeds, the attempt might further be made to reconcile Greece with Bulgaria and Turkey. There might then develop under the patronage of the Triple Alliance a new Balkan League, whose aim would be to set a limit to the advance of the Pan-Slav current and to secure peace for our countries. This, however, will not be possible until Serbia, which at present forms the pivot of Pan-Slav policy, has been eliminated as a factor of political power in the Balkans. You too, after the recent frightful occurrences in Bosnia, will be convinced that a reconciliation of the antagonism that now separates Serbia from us is no longer to be thought of, and that the maintenance of the Pacific policy of all European monarchs will be threatened as long as this focus of criminal agitation in Belgrade is not subject to punishment. Conrad's audience. On July the 5th, Conrad had an audience with the Emperor at Schönbrunn. The discussion came at once to the political situation. His Majesty surveyed it in all aspects, and was perfectly clear as to its seriousness. I also expressed to His Majesty my view that war against Serbia was inevitable. His Majesty: Yes, that is quite right. But how will you carry on a war if they all then fall upon us, especially Russia? Conrad: Surely Germany will protect our rear. His Majesty looked at Conrad questioningly and said, Are you sure of Germany? Conrad here says that the Emperor had charged the Archduke Franz Ferdinand to ask the Kaiser at Konopisht whether Austria could in future count on Germany unconditionally, and the Kaiser had avoided answering the question. Conrad: But your Majesty, we must know how we stand in that matter. His Majesty: Yesterday evening a note was sent to Germany in which we called for a clear answer. Conrad: If the answer is to the effect that Germany is on our side, do we then go to war against Serbia? His Majesty: In that case, yes. After a moment's thought he continued, But if Germany does not give us this answer, what then? Conrad: Then to be sure, we stand alone. We ought, however, to get the answer quickly, for the great decision depends upon it. His Majesty: The German Emperor is on a journey to Scandinavia. In any case, we must wait for the answer. I had the impression that His Majesty did not feel sure of Germany, and for that reason was deferring the decision. Whilst the audience so far had gone smoothly, His Majesty now was somewhat moved when I put forward the necessity of declaring martial law as a countermeasure to further Serbian attempts within the monarchy, and in this connection I pointed out that similar occurrences to those in Bosnia were also being prepared in other districts of the monarchy, and might be directed against persons, headquarters, or important objectives, such as bridges. His Majesty: All that will happen on mobilisation. Conrad: It will then be too late. His Majesty: No, that is impossible. Conrad: There is nothing else for it, however. His Majesty: But I do not do it. Conrad: As your Majesty directs, I was obliged by my duty to propose it. On this, the Emperor became calmer again. Conrad: But the least I ask is immediate steps to deal with bombs and the like, and legal proceedings against those in possession of them. His Majesty: Good. I will instruct the Minister-Presidents concerned in that sense. The audience ended upon a genial and happy note. On Tuesday, said the Emperor, I go to Ilsch. Conrad asked if he himself might go to Tyrol. Of course, said his master. You too must recuperate.